So this one's a long presentation, and I'm going to skim through part of it because it may be some of it might be a review for you, especially if you had intro psychology. This one's on the psychosocial development of children, toddlers, the first 2 years. So babies are emotional beings. Their early emotions include high emotional responsiveness, reactive to pain and pleasure. They have super complex social awareness that's really limited or hampered by their lack of language at first. Lots of smiling and laughing. Social smiling begins about week 6 and is typically provoked by seeing a human face. Laughter at 3 and 4 months, often associated with curiosity. Other emotions that are expressed include anger at around 6 months, which might be a healthy response to frustration, and sometimes sadness in the first few months, indicated withdrawal or accompanied by increased production of cortisol. So remember we talked in a couple of chapters ago about how we want to keep stressors down. Cortisol is not a good stress hormone to expose infants to over the long run. Some of the emotions are listed in the table here, from social smiling at 6 weeks all the way up to self-awareness as indicated by the Rouge test at 18 months. Some others include fear, which comes out at about 9 months. Stranger awareness or wariness. You've probably heard or seen people with beards or that have strange clothes on or haircuts. Sometimes it scares a child. They go from a friendly face to one that's apprehensive and fearful. And of course, this can also often be promoted by separation anxiety. Tears, dismay, and anger occur when the familiar caregiver leaves. It can remain strong after age 3, sometimes even in some people argue into adulthood. Toddlers' emotions, especially anger and fear, become less frequent and more focused. So it's not like a whitewash of emotions. Laughter and crying become louder and more discriminating, and the bane of most parents' temper tantrums. New emotions emerge, including pride, shame, embarrassment, disgust, and guilt. You might wonder why, when a child has a toileting accident, they go behind the sofa. Well, partly it may be to mask what they're doing, but it may also be because of embarrassment or shame, which are newly emerged emotions in their repertoire. Emotional awareness happens as a person's realization that he or she is a distinct individual whose mind, body, and actions are separate from the others, especially the mother. In the first 4 months, infants have relatively no sense of themselves and may see themselves as part of their mother. By 5 months, they begin to develop a sense of awareness of themselves as separate from their mothers, and by 15 to 18 months, the emergence of me and self occurs, the sense of self as the object of one's knowledge. So I have awareness of who I am. Some interesting things happened during this time period too. The mirror recognition test by Lewis and Brooks in 1978. I think there's a video up on the learning material about this. Babies aged 9 to 24 months looked into a mirror after a dot of rouge was put on their nose. They didn't realize someone was doing that, by the way. None of the babies younger than 12 months overreacted as if the mark was there. Between 15 and 24 months, they showed self-awareness by touching their own nose with curiosity. It's important to remember that experience and culture affect emotions as well. They promote specific connections between neurons and emotions. They shape the functional anatomy of self-representation. Direct connections to maturity of the anterior cingulate gyrus on each side of the brain and other parts of the limbic system, the primitive emotional system in the midbrain, are important and related to the preferences for specific others. Stresses can impair the brain, especially when it's paired with high emotions. In highly stressful environments, babies at about 7 months have higher cortisol levels in relation to challenges. Other challenges Synesthesia is the mixing of the senses together. So one sense can trigger another one. This cross-modal perception occurs more in infants, is common in infants, and may be the basis for our early social understandings. Have you ever had it where a certain odor triggers a memory? Well, that's kind of related to the synesthesia. And you may not even remember what the memory is. It's just something early and maybe even primitive in your life. This just depicts babies crying, parents soothe them with around the world, while context shapes both crying and soothing. The little girl on the left is probably quiet soon as she is held snugly to her mother's father's body. The boy on the right is less likely to settle down. He is surrounded by strangers in the Ukrainian contest to see which baby can crawl the fastest. Sometimes looking at parents for their reaction to stressful or painful situations can actually promote an emotional reaction. Of course, temperament is interesting. It's an inborn difference between one person and another in their emotions, their activity level, and how they regulate themselves. And temperament, by the way, tends to last the lifetime. It's epigenetic in that it's a mix of both heredity and environment, and it's originating in the genes but affected by child rearing practices. A long-term study that started in the 1960s, the New York longitudinal study, NYLS, saw temperament in 4 separate categories. Their conclusion was that effort for control was important, negative moods, fearful, angry, and unhappy, insurgency, active, social, not shy, and exuberant were all common dimensions that were important factors in temperament. Temperament traits are thought to be inborn. Some developmentalists seek to discover which alleles, that is, those non-sex gene chromosomes, or non-sex chromosomes, affect specific emotions. For example, the 7 repeat allele of, you can read that, combined with another genome results in a 6-month-old who are difficult. So it could be just a mixture of some of the genetic material that you pass from yourself to your child. A longitudinal study of infant temperament by Fox in 2001 grouped 4-month-olds into 3 distinct types based on their responsiveness to fearful stimulation: positive, exuberant; negative, and inhibitor, or fearful. Less than half altered their responses as they grew older, so evidence that it tends to be pervasive. Fearful infants are most likely to change. Exuberant infants were least likely to change. They like being happy and outgoing. And maturation and child rearing practices had an effect on inborn temperament. So you can, to some extent, affect temperament by your child rearing practices, but for all practical purposes, you are what you're born with. And you can study this if you like about what we just talked about, temperaments changing. Sometimes we use the goodness of fit model. So similarity of temperament and values that produce a smooth interaction between an individual and his or her social context, including family, schools, and communities. So for example, this is an extreme example, but if you have attention deficit disorder and are easily distracted, depending on the social context, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. If you are in a school classroom, that could be a bad thing, being distracted. If you are hunting or maybe in a hunter-gatherer type of society, a social context or family, it could be a very good thing because your energy levels far exceeds everyone else's. The big 5 dimensions of personality, the DeCosta and Ray McCrae model looks at the different 5 big dimensions. It's the acronym OCEANS. And childhood temperament is linked to parental genes and personality, and they've studied this empirically using the big 5. Personality is often assessed by using these 5 dimensions. Synchrony, on the other hand, is really interesting. It's the coordinated, rapid, and smooth exchange of responses between caregiver and infant. It's almost like emotional tennis where you volley back and forth. Synchrony begins in the first few months of life. It becomes more and more frequent and elaborate. It helps infants learn to read others' emotions and to develop the skills of social interactions, and usually begins with parents imitating infants. Have you ever wondered why your parents can, in some ways, kind of read your mind? Well, they've been doing it a long time through the process of synchrony. Or have you ever hit it off with somebody that really well, and you just feel like you're on the same wavelength, so to speak? Again, that's synchrony. Um, in terms of social bonds, both partners are active. A symbiotic relationship of adult and infant partnership is a powerful learning tool. Synchrony begins with adults imitating infants with tone and rhythm, playing with them verbally and emotionally, so to speak, and responding to the nuances of a child's facial expressions and body motions. This is particularly evident in Asian cultures, also viewed in Western cultures as well. So synchrony lets infants and caregivers communicate the crucial messages that one person seeks to share with another. It's a message of I love you or how delightful, but it's told in a more synchronous way. The father probably knows, but he doesn't have to say it, he can guess it by the look and synchrony in the child's behavior. Is synchrony needed for normal development? Well, it's probably pretty important. Experiments using the still face technique, which is another video that's up on the learning materials. Experimental practice in which adults keeps his or her face unmoving and expressionless in face-to-face interactions with the infants. When this happens into a synchronous couple, a child and a parent, the babies become very upset and frustrated with the still face and show signs of distress. So the conclusion is that parents' responsiveness to an infant's aids psychological and biological development. The infant's brain needs social interaction to develop to their fullest. So synchrony is really important. Another important aspect of psychosocial development is attachment. It involves lasting emotional bonds that one person has with another. It begins to form early in infancy and influences a person's close relationships not only in childhood but throughout life. In some ways, it overtakes synchrony. So we attach to certain personality types. It's demonstrated through proximity seeking, they want to be around you, and maintaining contact. There are different types of attachment. Avoidant attachment, type A, resistant or ambivalent attachment, type C, and disorganized attachment, part D. Secure attachment, which of course is type B, which is the one we want, is the most desirable. So you can see that secure attachment, if you took all the children and divide them into a pie, 60% of them have secure attachments. About 15% have avoidant, 15% have ambivalent, and 10% have the worst of all, called disorganized attachment. So you can see during the developmental period, the first few months of life, where social bonds occur and the stages of attachment. Birth to 6 weeks is called pre-attachment. 6 weeks to 8 months is called the attachment phase, and 18 months to 2 years is called a classical secure attachment. So even something as simple as this can be broken down into a timeline. 2 to 6 months, 6 years, his attachment is the launching pad. 6 to 12 years, there's mutual types of attachments when kids make friends. 12 to 18 months or years is new attachment figures. So the teenagers starting to leave home and make friends outside of the home. And from 18 years on, attachment is revisited over and over again in adulthood. So this, by the way, could be a great paper if somebody wants to do a paper on attachment over the lifespan. Signs of attachment. Infants show their attachment in several ways. By proximity seeking, they want to be around you. And they do it by touching, snuggling, and holding. Attachment is a universal part of inborn social nature of human species. We need to be attached. Specific manifestations vary depending on the culture and the age of the people who are attached and to each other. And it not only happens developmentally, but you can even have new attachment experiences in adulthood. Secure attachments type B, in which the infant obtains both comfort and confidence from the presence of his or her caregiver. Insecure avoidant attachments, patterns of attachment type A, in which the infant avoids connection with caregivers, as when the infant seems to not care about the caregiver's presence, departure, or even their return back home. Type C, the insecure, resistant, ambivalent attachment, in which anxiety and uncertainty are evident, is when the infant becomes very upset or at separation from the caregiver and both resists and seeks contact on reunion. And of course, the last one, type D, called the disorganized attachment, is marked by an infant's inconsistent reaction to the caregiver's departure and return. So sometimes they might be excited to see them, and other times not. This just reviews what we just talked about, patterns of infant attachment. And of course, this has all been shown empirically. One of the studies that there is actually a video on the learning materials on the strange situation, laboratory procedures for measuring attachment by evoking infants' reaction to the stress of various adults coming and going from an unfamiliar playroom. So it's worth watching. Key observed behaviors include exploration of the toys, reaction to the caregiver's departure. These are being measured by the investigators, and reaction to the caregiver's return. So we can do this in an empirical setting as well, empirical/laboratory setting. Other findings are the harsh context, especially stresses of poverty, reduce the incidence of secure attachment. Insecure attachment correlates with many later problems. Some cautions include insecure attachments may be a sign, but may not be the direct cause of the problem. Attachment behaviors in the strange situation constitute one indication of a quality of the parent-child relationship. But remember we talked, I think I mentioned this earlier, that just because things seem to go together doesn't mean that one causes the other. That's the problem with correlation coefficients. So this sequence is repeated daily for a 1-year-old. They get excited, they get troubled, they get comforted. And this is why the same sequence is replicated to measure attachment. As you see, toys are no substitute for mother's comfort in the infant or toddler if they're secure, as this one seems to be. Some, however, cry inconsolably and throw toys angrily when the parent left. You can read through this and see the developmental social bonds and predictors of attachment types. When attachment isn't there, in the new Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, includes a new diagnostic category for attachment called reactive attachment disorder. It recognized that some children never form attachment at all, not even an insecure one, or insecure attachment. There's a very, very famous high-profile case of Russia sending a child over to a couple in the United States who they basically lied on the application and said that this child was healthy. In fact, he suffered from reactive attachment disorder. And it was high profile because the parents literally mailed the child back. They put him on a plane and sent him back to Russia. This really put a damper on adoptions from Russia at the time. Insight from Romania in the early 1990s, thousands of children were adopted from Romanian orphanages. Many of these children displayed adverse outcomes. Research on them confirms that early experiences, not genetics, is the main cause of attachment problems. Imagine being a child living in conditions like that. How often do they get picked up? How often do they interact? Do they talk to other people? Are they talked to or read to? Pretty sad situation. Another important aspect is called social referencing, where a child seeks emotional responses or information from other people. This is also a video on the learning material on this. Observing someone else's expressions and reactions, especially the parents, and using the other person as a social reference. This utilizes referencing in constant and selective ways. So if you didn't know that was a larva, you probably would not be, or a grub, you wouldn't be, you would have a different reaction if you thought it was a piece of rotini. You might look at somebody who knows what's going on, and they may give you a visual thumbs up or whatever. So we use referencing all the time. Mothers use a variety of expressions, vocalizations, gestures to convey social information to their infants. Others do more than caregiving and comforting. This happens through synchrony, through attachment, and social referencing. And this all happens with fathers too, but not quite as much. Fathers elicit more smiles and laughter from their infants than mothers because they engage in more intensive play and teach appropriate emotional expressions. So it takes two parents to raise kids, and each parent has a different role in many ways. Not all toddlers who are naturally curious or careless, but maybe not on the father either. Both depression and spanking are affected by financial stress, marital conflict, and cultural norms. And who's responsible for those? Shame is a powerful emotional state. So fathers and their sons enjoy, it's not surprising, but notice that infants' hands, one clutching dad's hair tightly and the other reaching for dad's face. At this age, infants show their trust in adults by grabbing and reaching. Synchrony and attachment are mutual. In Ireland on the left and Kenya on the right may not be very different in your own neighborhood. There are theories of psychosocial development that I'll just mention quickly here. They include Freud, who thought that during the first and second year you were in the oral stage, followed by the anal stage, where the erogenous zone or sexual pleasure occurs first in your mouth and then in your anus. There's potential conflicts with this, including what's called oral fixation. So oral personalities develop where they talk too much, or they're vulgar, or they smoke, or maybe overweight. And anal personalities become very either expulsive, where they, in a metaphorical sense, poop on everyone, or they're retentive, where they hold it in. If you've ever seen the play or the movie The Odd Couple, it actually exploits this oral or this anal personality style, one of the partners being anal retentive and one being anal expulsive. But no one uses the psychoanalytic model anymore. We'd be happy to talk more about this at a Zoom meeting if you like. There's a psychosocial theory by Erickson, who was a classically trained analyst, actually worked with Sigmund Freud's daughter. He departed from Freud's focus on the psychosexual and emphasized psychosocial changes. He said it's all about trust and mistrust. Successful infants basically trust the world around them. They see the world as a safe place. By the time they're in their second year, they are learning how to be toilet trained, either succeed or fail at gaining a sense of self-rule over their actions, especially toilet training. And if they have trouble with that, they can develop a sense of doubt. Here's the behavioral approach, especially Albert Bandura, who was a cognitive behaviorist. He emphasized the importance of modeling. Parents who mold their infants' emotions and personality through reinforcement and punishment. Actually, Bandura didn't talk a whole lot about reinforcements. He says that you can learn simply by watching. You don't even have to demonstrate that you know how to do something, because years later it may become apparent that when you watch that person changing a tire that you knew how to do it simply by observation. Incidentally, the Bobadil experiment, which is also on the learning materials, is a good example of what happens when people observe violence and then at some point later on imitate what they've seen. There are other theories of psychosocial development. One of them is called proximal parenting, caregiver practices that involve being physically close to the baby with frequent holding and touching. Sometimes nowadays it's called helicopter parenting. Distal parenting, maybe what happened when I was a child. Caregivers practice that involve remaining distant from the baby, providing toys, food, and face-to-face communication with minimal holding and touching. Um, I'm not sure one's better than the other. Maybe a combination of both might be a more healthy way of approaching parenting. Research findings, Keller and colleagues, notable differences exist between newborns and older children with these types of parenting. Culture is especially pivotal for the proximal distal response. Distal parenting results may produce children who are self-aware but less obedient. And proximal parenting results may produce toddlers who are less self-aware or more compliant. Always maybe worrying about losing the affection and love of the parent. In summary, of proximal and distal parenting, every aspect of early emotional development interacts with cultural beliefs expressed in parental actions. No culture anywhere encourages caregivers to be indifferent to infants' emotions. Quite the opposite. Cultural differences may become encoded in the infant's brain, call it like a cultural sponge from one group of scientists. Another theory is the cognitive theory. Actually, Bandura was a cognitive psychologist as well, but this is a working model with a set of assumptions that individuals use to organize perceptions and experiences. It assumes that other people are trustworthy and being surprised by evidence that this working model of human behavior is erroneous. The child's interpretation of early experiences is more important than their actual experiences. New working models can be developed based on new experiences or reinterpretations of previous experiences. Humanists really didn't have much to say about psychosocial development of toddlers, but you recall Maslow's hierarchy of needs with a kind of a square pyramid that starts from the bottom up. So to become self-actualized at the top of the pyramid requires at least completion of the first 4 levels. Infants are totally dependent on their caregivers, so they must have their physiological needs met. They'll never get to the top of the pyramid as an infant. This takes adulthood and lots of life experiences. But imagine if you're a parent and you're trying to get your kid up the pyramid, you would probably need to be up there as well. Evolutionary theory has lots to say about child rearing and the psychosocial development of infants. Emotions are there because they survived. They're enmeshed in our evolutionary mandate of reproduction and perpetuating the species. Over human history, attachment, proximal seeking, contact maintaining, promoting species survival by keeping toddlers near the caregivers and keeping the caregivers vigilant. Allocare, by the way, is a type of child care by people other than the biological parents. It's been an essential part of the human survival. It's nothing new. Taking your child to child care has been going on since humans were walking upright. Infant daycare is often an option for parents. The proportion of infants in non-relative care varies markedly from one country to the next. Involvement of relatives other than mothers varies. Worldwide, fathers are increasingly involved in child care. Depends on the culture. And in some countries, including the United States, there's paid leave for mothers, but to a point. In Sweden, for example, they allow the first 9 months of care for a mom or dad, either one, to be home on paid leave the entire time period. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one you want to stay home. They'll allow you to do that with pay. The essential characteristics of high-quality daycare include adequate attention to every infant, encouragement of language and sensory motor development. Remember, this period's about attention to health and safety, a safe child environment, professional and trained caregivers and warm and responsive caregivers. Probably don't want ones that use corporal punishment, but we'll talk about that later. The effects of the infant daycare can be very positive. Family income, culture, religion, education affect the choice of care, and those same variables affect child development. The fact that boys are more affected than girls may indicate something about the biology of different sexes, and that difficult boys are often placed in daycare or other cultures, or that other cultures encourage traits in boys that are discouraged in girls. Not every study finds that boys are more affected again. There are many possible reasons to explain a lack of gender differences, just as there are many reasons to explain other gender differences. The impact of non-maternal care depends on many factors. Psychosocial characteristics include secure attachment, are influenced more by the mother's warmth and the number of hours spent in non-maternal care. The quality of care is crucial, no matter who provides the care, which is a great place to stop.